Welcome back. I am Kimmy with On William Street, and this week we're going to go back to the quilting, do some free motion quilting, and we're going to talk about feathers. And feathers are one of those elements that have been around probably almost as long as quilting has. They're usually thought of as a very traditional quilting element, but in recent years they've really been updated and changed and altered a lot. And so you can have very whimsical feathers, very playful, you can have more modern feathers, plus you can have those traditional feathers, and they can be very versatile and really fit on a lot of different quilts. So as I've looked at my feathers over the years and as I've practiced them, and also as I've seen how other people are approaching feathers in some of the classes that I've taught and participated in, I've noticed that there's kind of a few common themes, common issues that people have at the beginning and ways that they do it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to show you some of those more common things that you may be doing as you're starting out with feathers, and I'm going to show you how to change those so that you can improve your overall feather. All right, so when you're drawing a feather, it really has two basic parts. You have your spine and you have the petal shape, and really that's all there is to it. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you can adapt these and change them a little bit, but it's really those are the two main parts. So one of the first things I see when people start making feathers is they kind of go straight out like this. And when you do this, you end up with this kind of first grader bee wing thing going on, and it's not really the look that we're going for with a feather. So when you make your feather petal, keep in mind that it's really kind of like a half of a heart shape, but even more so than that, it's kind of an exaggerated half heart shape. So you're going to go ahead and swoop out and then swoop around and come back in. So you can see this really exaggerated heart shape. So that way, when you go ahead and make your feathers, you're going to bring it around and it's going to give you that nice elongated tucked in look that you're going for. It's going to allow you to nest those feathers so that when you make the next petal, it's going to kind of follow right along that same shape of the one before it and nest them all the way up. So the second thing that people sometimes do is they make little tiny short feathers, and this is one of the things that I really had to overcome. I would have the heart shape, but it would be these little tiny petal things. And when you go ahead and stretch those out, it's going to give you a more elegant feather, and it's going to create a lot more movement. This is fine if you have like a small space that you're working in that you're trying to fill. Obviously you're going to make those feathers fit that space, but if you have more space to fill up the whole space. So what I found is if I've got a problem and I see myself doing little tiny short feather petals, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually draw a guide on there. And what this is going to do is I'm going to tell myself I have to reach out and touch that guide. This isn't as much of a problem if I have a shape to fill, but if it's more of an empty space, give yourself a guide. And I'm just going to draw that on with some chalk, something that's going to wipe off really easy, and I'm going to go ahead and hit that. Now with this, I actually really prefer feathers that aren't all the same size. This works with that as well. That way not every single petal has to reach out and touch that line, but as long as you keep in mind that some of them, most of them, that's the space you're trying to fill, you're going to come off and it's going to look better. So you can still see that some of those shapes weren't all necessarily touching the line, but most of them were, a lot of them were, and it really filled that space and it elongates those petals. So after that, the next thing I want you to think about is moving up the spine. Sometimes we get so good at making that elongated heart shape that we actually come back in to the same point that we were at before. And as you can see, as we move up the spine, this becomes a problem because you're going to end up with these petals laying directly on the spine. You don't really have any way to move. So when you're doing it, just make sure that you're moving up just a little bit each time. Each of those feathers is going to come up the spine just a little bit, and that's going to naturally move you and the whole shape up the spine. You don't want to come back to the exact same spot. The one exception to that is if you're doing a bounce back feather. When you have your bounce back feather, you're going to make your first shape. You're going to come from that same part. You're going to come out, touch, bump back, bounce back, come back in, and that's where you're going to go ahead and go up a little bit from where you started. From that same point, you're going to bounce out, bump back, and you're going to stop a little bit above where you started. So you can see that you're still going ahead and moving up that spine. The very last thing that I want to talk about is if you have a lot of curves. This was a trick that I read about a year ago, that's really helped me. And if you have a really big curve that you're trying to fill, go ahead and draw an imaginary line or use your chalk and go ahead and draw it halfway through that spine. Now, as I'm making my feathers, I'm going to know I'm not going to go ahead and cross that spine, that line. As I'm moving up my spine, I'm going to fill in all of this space. Then when I get to here, I'm going to come back down and I'm actually going to meet that line again as I'm filling up my feather here. On this side it doesn't matter as much, it's really just the inside curve that you're going to have to worry about that on. And we're going to keep working our way up. So showing you that from the other side, I'm going to come around. So I'm working up towards that curve. I'm going to get to that line and I'm going to stop, fill in that space, come back around the other side of that, and fill it in from there. And you can see it really fills it. A lot of people are able to actually just stretch their feathers and fill that in naturally. If that's something that you can do, go for it, try it out, see how it works. But if you're having trouble with that, go ahead and try this kind of method of splitting it halfway and see if that helps you to move up those curves a little bit better. So now that we've drawn them all out, I'm going to go ahead and stitch some out for you on the sewing machine so you can kind of see how this all plays out for stitching as well. So when I stitch a feather, I'm always going to go ahead and either stitch the spine in or draw the spine in first. I'm not going to try to just freehand it without a spine. It's just too hard. There's not anything for me to follow and the shape just never comes out right. So I'm going to go ahead, I just use some chalk. I'm also going to go ahead and draw in, like I talked about, our guides on either side. This is just washable school chalk, Crayola chalk. With anything though, don't draw on a quilt until you've tested it. I've never had any issues with this chalk, but test it out first. Don't just draw on a quilt until you make sure that it actually works like you want it to, and will come out. So go ahead and pull up my bobbin thread, or not. Try that again. And I like to just pull my bobbin thread up to get started. That way it's not going to create a nest on the back. And I'm going to stitch the spine first. Okay, so from there, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the feather, focusing on that elongated, exaggerated heart shape, stretching out to the lines, and then still making sure that I'm moving up the spine and not coming back into the same spot. You can also stitch each, I'm going to go ahead and stitch up one side and come down my spine and stitch the other, but keep in mind if you want to, you can always alternate petals and side to side and go ahead and stitch them up from there. I'm going to go ahead and do one side at a time. Okay, so now that I'm to the top, I'm going to go ahead and move my way back down the spine. If you don't want to have a spine build up or have a lot of heavy thread on the line, or if you're not confident in your ability to actually trace back over it, you can actually leave a little space on the spine. So that's just one variation you can see. Once that line's gone, you won't see it. One variation you can see when you're coming back down. And then I'm going to go ahead and work my way up the other side. Alright, so now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and smooth over. I'm just going to show you what I talk about when what I was talking about when you have a really curvy spine. Okay, so the one other thing I wanted to stretch out for you is when you have that really curvy spine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my curvy spine. Okay, so then from there, I'm going to take my chalk and I'm going to go ahead and give myself that half line. And you can do this just mentally if you can. I like to go ahead and give myself an actual visual. And then I'm going to stitch that, coming up and stopping at that mark. Okay, so now that I've stopped at that mark, when I come around the top, I'm going to go over and I'm going to meet them at that same spot. And you can see how those meet and fill that whole space. Now I'm going to go ahead and work myself back down the spine. And continue up this side. Stop. So again, you can see how that fills that space just by stopping at that line and meeting on both sides. So those are a few different things. So make sure to remember the elongated petal shape, meeting at the spine if you need to, stretch it out, and then make sure that you're working your way up the spine as you stitch out those feathers. So if you're struggling with feathers, go ahead and take some of these tips, apply it to you, kind of look and see what are the aspects that you need to improve on, and try some of these little suggestions that I gave you. And like I said, don't forget to practice doodle, 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 and then of course stitching them out on the machine. And you really will notice that your feathers will improve pretty quickly as you practice those out and stitch those out more. So definitely encourage you to doodle them, practice them, and see where it goes. And if you are working on your feathers, please go ahead and tag us on social media, either on Facebook or Instagram. We'd love to see what you're doing. Send us an email. We really do want to see what projects you guys are working on. So please share them with us. It makes us so happy to see the things that you're making. And make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our future videos. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook, where we post lots of projects and lots of pictures. And we will see you next week. Bye.